Okay, we are reading chapter 8 that starts on page 80, I believe, of our novel. Let's take a look and get started. Chapter 8, The Capture. The moon was full when the boys left, and full a month later when old Tallow returned with her dogs. Many things happened in that time. The women made a new camp. They replenished their store of dried meat. They fished and trapped. They found a rice bay and busied themselves harvesting every grain. Dragonflies had lifted and hovered over the rice. They seemed friendly, comforting. Omakias had whispered to them messages of love for the men and for old Tallow. In all that time, they saw no sign of the Buanag. The women did what they could to work hard and tried their best not to despair. But on the afternoon when they saw old Tallow walk into camp alone, Yellow Kettle, Nokomis, Omakias, and Angeline fell to the ground in fear. Before anyone could ask, old Tallow cried out, "Captured!" "But all is not lost, thanks to your Day-Day," she quickly said. "The men are 2 days behind me. They have Quill." Mama howled with joy and threw herself on old Tallow, who patted her awkwardly. Nokomis sat on the ground, breathing hard, weeping along with Omakias, who was terrified to ask what had happened to Anamikins and his father. "They would not release Anamikins," old Tallow said softly. Everyone was silent. "Fishtail?" asked Angeline weakly. "He returned," said old Tallow. "Here is how it went. She settled herself and her dogs. Nokomis gave her a macaque of water and some pemmican. "We trailed them all the way to their camp out in the flat world, the plains," continued old Tallow. "Your Dede walked up to the enemy camp alone. Hawa! His courage astounded the Buanag, and the council chief who had called the world war party came forward." Nokomis, Mama, Angeline, and Omakaya sat down to listen to old Tallow. Jean took his little sister and Bijins away. He was very good at amusing them. And he was even beginning to learn some of the Anishinaabe language. Old Tallow's story. The chief and Dede agreed to have peaceful talks, and then the rest of us appeared. I don't think that they could tell that I was a woman, because when I sat down, they didn't flinch away. They were interested to see me. The chief and Dede smoked the pipe. It was found that the Buanag were not out for war. They were searching for a captive to replace the chief's son. He had been lost 1 year ago to our people. "When we first saw this boy with the porcupine on his head," said the chief, "we were mystified. We watched him for a long time and then decided that his medicine must be very great. He was hard to capture. His porcupine fought with him. Our warriors were covered with his arrows." "Yes," said Dede to the Buan. Dede was the only one of us who spoke their language, so he translated what the Buan chief said. His eyes lighted with pride at his son's strength. As for me, I was caught between pride and laughter, even in that dangerous situation. I could not help but think of Quill's great battle, his porcupine swiping at the Buanag warriors from the top of his master's head. Dede continued to speak. "I can see that you are broken-hearted, and that my people are responsible. But if you take my son or the son of Miskobines, then we will be broken-hearted." "Why should that matter to us?" said the chief with scorn. "Because it will cause us to raise a war party, and someone in your village will surely die." "Yes, that's true, but we are not afraid." "See into my fatherly heart," said Dede, "and know that I have never hurt one of your people. I have never made war against your people. I have traded with and admired you. I do not want to kill you, and I do not want you to kill my sons, or me, or my party here. I think we can find another way." "What way is that?" asked the chief. The two smoked their pipes and were lost in contemplation. Then Dede said, "We will adopt each other. We will become brothers. We will enter your clan and you will enter ours. We will bring gifts to you and honor you. For 1 year, you will have me, my son, and his medicine animal to console you. The next year, my son and I will return to our family." I could tell how deeply it hurt him to make this offer. I could see that tears shone in his eyes. But he spoke clearly and said, "We could do more, at peace." The war chief was impressed with his offer and called his council. While they talked, however, Miscobines came forward and raised his arm. Came forward and raised his arm, and then he spoke, and Dede translated. "Hear me, all of you. My son is named for the thunders, and he is a fine son. I love him more than I love my own life. My son, Anamikins, has offered to be the son of the chief instead of Quill. He says that Quill is not yet old enough, nor is the porcupine on his head." The chief smiled in spite of himself. "Anamikins, named for the thunders, has said that he will take his place. For my part, as his father, I offer to adopt you also. I offer to live for 1 year as the hunter in a family who has lost a man. I am still strong. I can still draw a bow, and I have the wisdom of these gray hairs. I am not done with my existence yet. I will live here for 1 year only to help the Buanag. Then my son and I will return to help our people." "Why," said the chief, "if I take a liking to this boy and he looks like a fine, strong boy, should I agree to let him go?" Then Anamikins turned bold. He spoke. "Because," he said, holding up the red beads that someone had given him, "I promised to return these to a girl." When this was translated to the Buanag, they burst out laughing and slapped Anamikins on the back and made jokes. And then we had a great feast, and they gave the men new sets of clothing. They figured me out and gave me a dress, which I saved for Nokomis here, and after quite a few more days of getting to know one another, we took our leave of those people. They were surprisingly good people. Sisitin and Wapatin, they called themselves. Very generous, though still fearsome. Old Tallow reached into her pack and shook out a beautiful dress made of white doe skin. The skin was fluffy and light as cloth, beaded blue and orange across the yoke. It had a deep fringe and was created with admirably tiny stitches. "Humph," said Nokomis. "This woman can sew. Their women can sew." She accepted the dress and held it in her arms. "But they can't have our boy, and they can't have the old man either." Still, it was a great relief to know that the men were alive, and everyone slept more soundly than they had for an entire moon. There's the dress. You guys see the dress will come up in just a minute.
No.
When Dede, Fishtail, and Quill arrived, everyone gathered around, hugging them, amazed and tearful. Angeline was almost faint with relief, and all of her love showed in her face, increasing her beauty to such a degree that she seemed to blaze in the fresh light. From her pack, she drew Fishtail's wedding vest. At once he put it on, and then the two stared into each other's eyes. Feeling much older, but still in love, they stood holding each other in gratitude. Yellow Kettle always confused her affection with anger, and even as she put her head against Dede's chest, she gave a furious shake of her hand at Quill and cuffed at him before he darted away. The porcupine tumbled off his head, and Nokomis took the opportunity to grab Quill in a hug, so there was nothing he could do but hug her back. Omakia stood aside and tried not to feel anything but the happiness of seeing her father and brother, but part of her was bereft. She missed Anamikins and Miscobines. She wondered if she'd ever see the boy who seemed to understand her, or the old man with his great sense of thoughtful dignity. "They will return," said Dede, as if he knew what she was thinking. "The Buan chief promised that they would be back by next spring." Omakias turned her head shyly in confusion that her feelings were noticed, and when she did, she stared directly into the eyes of the Chimukaman boy. Jean stood motionless with his little sister, watching the reunion. There was no doubt that he too was happy to see Dede and Quill, but in his face there was also an intense longing for his own parents, surely. Omakias instantly felt a pang of grief for him. She walked over, put her arm around his shoulders, and said that he was a brave boy. He didn't yet understand enough of the Ojibwe language to reply, but he seemed to know that she cared for him. His hand tightened on her wrist. And that's the end of that chapter, chapter 8.